tonight.
If the state of Lebanon and the world can't push Hezbollah away from our border, we have no choice but to do it ourselves.
The latest from Lebanon as Israel carries out a ground incursion against Hezbollah. Plus, as floodwaters recede, Helene's devastation comes into focus.
It's way worse than we expected.
The work taking place to help rescuers reach the hardest hit areas. And while the Biden administration tightens asylum restrictions, some evangelical leaders are urging both presidential candidates approach immigration with biblical principles. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Iran launches a major missile attack on Israel, ramping up tensions in a region already in crisis. Good evening from CBN Studio in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. As dozens of missiles pierced the Israeli night sky, the country's military defense system responded.
As air raid sirens sounded throughout Israel, residents in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem were ordered to shelter in place. Waves of projectiles flew over Tel Aviv and Haifa, with most of them intercepted by Israeli air defenses, the Iron Dome and David Shield. Soon after, a series of explosions were heard in those areas. Earlier, the IDF and U.S. released warnings of an imminent ballistic missile strike from Iran. In a video statement, Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari assured citizens the air defense system is fully operational, detecting and intercepting threats wherever necessary, even at this moment. These missile launches came hours after Israeli ground troops launched raids into Lebanon and its warplanes bombed from the sky. During a White House briefing, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confirmed Iran launched nearly 200 missiles toward Israel.
We continue to reinforce the point American citizens in Lebanon should follow the guidance from the State Department, which is to find civilian commercial means to depart, because in extremis, we may not be able to get them out safely.
And at this time, no deaths have been reported from the Iranian missile attacks, but Israel authorities are reporting at least 6 people were killed in a terrorist shooting attack in Tel Aviv and Haifa tonight.
Well, joining us now is CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, we caught you earlier tonight taking shelter while you were doing that live stream on CBN's YouTube channel. Can you give us an update? What's happening now and what are you seeing and hearing?
Well, what happened a few hours ago, John and Jenna, was, just like millions of Israelis sought bomb shelters and any safe place they could. Right now, I think everybody's anticipating what is Israel going to do after this second major attack by Iran. The IDF has already met, and now they're waiting to see what the political echelon is going to do. And they're meeting actually right now in Jerusalem in a bunker in this city. It remains to be seen how big the attack is going to be. When Iran attacked in April, there wasn't much of a response. In fact, you may remember President Biden told Prime Minister Netanyahu, you've got to win, take a win, because 99% of those projectiles were shot down. It's a different story now. It's a different atmosphere. Israel's been on the offensive in Lebanon, and now we'll see if it's going to be a robust attack and possibly even against Iran's nuclear facilities.
Chris, the Pentagon says it fired a dozen interceptors against those Iranian missiles. To the extent of what's happening in Lebanon, the last time Israeli troops were on the ground there was in 2006 to create a buffer zone for Jewish residents along the northern border with Lebanon. What's the goal this time?
That is the goal. They want to have a buffer zone from the blue line, the Israeli-Lebanese border, all the way up to what's called the Litani River. It's about 19 miles long or wide buffer zone. They want to be able to, the residents of the north that have been under rocket attack for almost a year, to be able to go back safely to their homes. And so they think they can do that by establishing this buffer zone. There used to be one from 1982 to 2000. Israel pulled out. Hezbollah filled that vacuum. And now they're going to try to reestablish that buffer zone and that safe zone for Israeli residents, nearly tens of thousands of them, to go back home.
So just about a minute left, Chris. We know that Israel is in Lebanon after decapitating Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Do you think that Israel will respond, though, to Iran's missile strike? What's the sense of what might happen in the next day or two?
Maybe in the next few hours, John and Jenna. I think they're definitely going to respond. They have said if Iran attacks Israel, there will be consequences. This attack, although it didn't cause much damage or death, I think there's going to be a robust response by the IDF. And as I said, who knows? Could be the oil facilities or even the nuclear facilities, something that Israel's been wanting to take out for literally a few decades.
All right, CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Stay safe, Chris. And for more on the situation unfolding on the ground, make sure to check out the CBN News YouTube channel for live updates and cbnnews.com for complete coverage. All right, we turn now to David Daoud for a broader regional perspective on how today's events affect Mideast politics. David is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. David, welcome. So let's get your reaction to this missile attack from Iran. Do you see it as a start of a wider war?
Well, that's hard to assess. There's been a wider war going on, though, since October 8th, really, when in the day after the October 7th massacre that Hamas launched from Gaza, the rest of Iran's resistance axis, this collection of militias and forces that are ideologically aligned with or subordinate to Iran, primarily Hezbollah, began attacking Israel. What we saw today is a continuation of that war that has been going on. Now, of course, wars can intensify, and this was an extreme step that was taken by Iran, but ultimately, and it ended up being largely symbolic. Now, the Israelis have said, according to reports, that irrespective of the damage that an Iranian attack would cause, irrespective of any harm, irrespective of its size, that they would respond massively against Iran. And according to Wall Street Journal, the Israelis had apparently threatened to potentially strike Iran's nuclear and oil facilities in response. Now, whether this is a threat meant to deter any Iranian action or whether it's a serious indication of Israeli action remains to be seen. After the attack, the Israeli Air Force said that they would be attacking tonight strongly throughout the Middle East. So we will see what the Israeli response will be.
David, Iran says what you called an extreme step by Iran with these missile attacks. They said that this was in retaliation for killing former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. So where does his death leave Hezbollah organizationally, and what are the implications? You mentioned a little bit, but more broadly regionally.
Well, Hassan Nasrallah, he wasn't a great religious scholar, nor was he a brilliant military commander. What he was for Hezbollah was an icon and a visionary. This is a man that took Hezbollah through decades of some of its most difficult historical junctures, and in almost every one of those historical junctures made the right choice, with the exception, I would say, of October 8th. That was the decision that he decided to attack Israel after Hamas did so. There's a straight line from that decision to his demise. Now, without this visionary, Hezbollah is going to suffer a setback. They are a strong organization. There is a chain of succession. We don't know what the chain of succession is now. There are a lot of question marks about who has survived the Israeli attacks, including his heir apparent and maternal cousin, Hashem Sofiuddin. But Hezbollah is an organization. It is not a ragtag militia. At the same time, whomever succeeds him to the helm of Hezbollah is not going to have the same aura that Hassan Nasrallah did. And that aura helped the organization, every time he'd come up and speak, frame even setbacks as an advantage for the organization. Without that, they're going to suffer some setback, but I wouldn't count them or discount them entirely just yet.
All right, David Daoud with FDD. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you so much for having me.
And back here at home, sheer devastation in the southeast. Hurricane Helene now ranking as one of the deadliest storms to ever hit the United States. Right now, more than 130 deaths are confirmed across 6 states. The most devastated area is western North Carolina, where hundreds are still missing. Drone video captures the extent of the devastation in Asheville. Many roads are impassable, isolating residents and complicating rescue efforts. In Buncombe County, more than 600 people are unaccounted for. Meanwhile, internet and phone outages are cutting victims off from the rest of the world. CBN's Operation Blessing is on the ground, passing out hygiene kits, food boxes, and supplies.
These will go to families who've been without power for days, and we get to come alongside them as the body of Christ and provide it at a local school that has been turned into a shelter.
Helene hit Florida's Gulf Coast last week as a Category 4 hurricane, moving through Georgia, the Carolinas, and Tennessee. On Monday, former President Donald Trump and evangelist Franklin Graham visited affected areas in Valdosta, Georgia. President Biden is expected to visit North Carolina tomorrow and promises emergency disaster funds for affected regions.
Coming up, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance get ready to face off at tonight's vice presidential debate. That and more on immigration when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back to Faith Nation. It's another debate night, this time between the two vice presidential nominees. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance will meet in Manhattan for their first and only showdown. The Harris campaign is downplaying expectations with reports that Walz is nervous and an inexperienced national debater. Meanwhile, former President Trump says he's confident Vance will display he has the edge. Still, both candidates have work to do. A majority of voters believe neither are qualified to step up and serve as president if needed.
All right, and I think we have Tony Perkins standing by. Tony Perkins, of course, is the president of the Family Research Council, and he joins us now. So, Tony, we want to kind of skip ahead here. I don't know if Tony can hear us.
I can hear you.
Okay, and Tony, we want to skip ahead here a little bit to immigration and the situation there. Top issue for voters. Groups like the SBC, World Relief, and Faith and Freedom Coalition are now weighing in. With that open to urging two nominees to implement biblical principles. Sorry for that messy question. I guess my question is your reaction to this call for biblical principles when it comes to immigration and both candidates.
Okay. You want me to answer it?
Yes, if you would, please.
I think it's the appropriate request is to have a biblical response to many of these issues. And in fact, I think the main thing driving this is the rhetoric surrounding immigration. And what we need is understand humanity, and speak in ways that are kind and compassionate toward other individuals. And I think part of the rhetoric has gotten so charged that we've lost the idea that all men, women, and children are created in the image of God. We can still have policy differences and seek to enforce those laws as they should be. But we need to tone down the rhetoric. And that is not just in immigration, but it's across the board in a lot of areas.
Probably wise counsel for, like you said, a lot of different areas when it comes to policy. Tony, we know that FRC's Pray, Vote, Stand Summit starts this week on Thursday right here in Washington. Who are you targeting as far as attendees? And remind us, what's the goal?
John, we are going after what are called SageCon, spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives. Those are individuals who are involved in the political process because of their faith, and they understand that this election will not save this nation. Could destroy it, but it's not going to save it. We have to understand that the deeper issues here are spiritual. The issues that we're wrestling with politically, whether it's the immigration issue, whether it's the abortion issue, whether it's the debt issue, these emanate from a spiritual illness in our nation, a departure from God and His truth. And so our call is to pray for our nation, to pray for us to fulfill our responsibility, to vote. Regardless of the choices before us, we have to do the hard work to understand who we need to vote for. And we're going to encourage people to vote for those who are most closely aligned with biblical truth. The choices aren't always crystal clear, but we have some pretty sharp contrast, and we're going to be talking about that at this year's Pray, Vote, Stand Summit. Begins Thursday night with a prayer, praise, and worship service here in Washington, D.C., October 3rd through the 6th. People can go to prayvotestand.org to find out more.
Yeah, Tony, I know you have a pretty impressive lineup as well. Talk about who's going to be there. Pastors, members of Congress. A lot of people wondering, will former President Trump be there? Give us an idea of what we can expect.
The focus this year is very intently focused on the spiritual foundation. We are going to have a few elected officials there, but primarily we're going to be having messages from pastors. We're going to hear from Mike Huckabee's going to be there Thursday night. We're going to hear from Pastor Jack Hibbs, Pastor Gary Hamrick. Bodie Bachman is going to be among our speakers. We're going to hear from Pastor Carter Conlon, Times Square Church. We will hear from House Speaker Mike Johnson will be speaking to the attendees. Dr. Ben Carson will be there. We'll be talking about border and immigration with Chad Wolf, former Director of Homeland Security. And so we're going to touch on a number of these issues. We're going to focus on basically taking the issues and understanding them through the lens of Scripture. We're going to talk about Israel and what's happening right there. We're going to have a panel discussion about that. We're going to talk about global governance. We're going to talk about understanding the times. We're going to cover a lot of landscape in those 2.5 days that we're together.
We only have a few seconds left, but I just wonder, with the election 5 weeks away, if you might offer an encouragement about balancing our civic duty along with the Christians' primary call as ambassadors of the gospel.
We always have to keep the main thing, and we have to do everything in light of eternity. And our goal is not just to win an election for a 4-year period. Our focus is eternity and making sure that we share the good news of the gospel. And so we never want to lose our witness in the process of being engaged in politics. We can do both. We can speak the truth in love, and that's what we're called to do.
That's a good word and good perspective. Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. Tony, thank you so much. It's nice to see you, and we wish you the very best this week.
Thanks. Always great to be with you guys.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back. It is another debate night, this time between the two vice presidential nominees.
That's right. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance will meet in Manhattan for their first and only showdown. The Harris campaign is downplaying expectations with reports that Walz is nervous and an inexperienced national debater. Meanwhile, former President Trump says he's confident Vance will display he has the edge. Still, both candidates have work to do. A majority of voters believe neither are qualified to step up and serve as president if needed.
Of course, with this debate, even though they're the vice presidential candidates, it's kind of the closing argument in a way. It's the last time we will see the opponents on stage together, and it's the last time for anybody to do any sort of comparison shopping in that regard.
Polls show that this will be a close election with high stakes. Tonight's debate is hosted by CBS and kicks off at 9 p.m. Eastern.
CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody, recently sat down with Democratic Senator Chris Coons, one of the co-chairs for the Harris campaign.
They discussed Harris's faith and what voters can expect to see at tonight's debate.
What's the biggest challenge right now going between now and November 5th?
It's important that she let people know who she is. Vice President Harris, I suspect, is not well known to your viewers as a person of Christian faith. And for a lot of people, when they hear about her background and her values and how her Christian faith has informed her work and her service, that makes them go, interesting, huh? It's clear to me that Joe Biden, who I've known for 30 years and who has attended Mass more regularly, more faithfully than the 3 previous presidents combined, he does not talk about his faith much. He doesn't want to. It's a deeply private and important part of who he is and of his values and of how he's come through hard times in life. He chose Kamala Harris knowing that she too is someone who privately, quietly has a faith that informs her and her values. In the campaign, it's important for people to know that about her and to get to know more about Tim Walz. So to answer your question concisely, if I could, folks need to get to know both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as people and as people of faith, and they need to get more specifics about their policy proposals, which they are getting in interviews, in campaign proposals, and in campaign announcements.
Right, so a little bit more meat on the bone. Do you think she'll do a press conference?
I do think she should do a press conference, but she just did an interview with Stephanie Ruhle last night. She's done interviews. She just did an interview with Wisconsin Public Radio when she was in Wisconsin a few days ago. She is doing interviews, and she is rolling out more details. Forgive me, but I think in sharp contrast to the former president, who, when he gets on stage and starts talking, he does talk a lot at rallies. It's not always clear exactly where he's going, and I have a hard time tracking some of his policy proposals.
What would be the difference then going forward with Kamala Harris as opposed to Joe Biden? Because a lot of people say it's part two of a Joe Biden second term, if you will. I mean, it's kind of the same type of outlook, definitely, and a lot of the same policies as well. How do you see the differentiation between the two?
Key difference, she's a generation younger. Key difference, she's got a worldview and an outlook that's informed by the differences in their background and age. And she has grown a great deal through her service in the Senate and as vice president.
The VP debate's coming up. Can you tee it up for us?
I suspect you'll see a fairly sharp engagement between the two of them. It won't determine the outcome of the presidential race, but I hope folks who are watching now will watch that debate, because part of our system is that someone who's vice president, it tells you two things. The candidate chose this person because they believe in them and their values, and they're going to handle a lot of the key work of the administration. And if for any reason, God forbid, there should be a tragic change in health or circumstances of the president, this person becomes our next president. So we can't afford to not look at it carefully.
Again, that was Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. This was part of a series of interviews with campaign surrogates. You can join us tomorrow on Faith Nation for David's interview with Laura Trump from the Trump campaign. Coming up, former President Jimmy Carter makes history, reaching a major milestone. And finally tonight, celebrating a century of life.
And today, former President Jimmy Carter turned 100 years old, becoming the oldest former U.S. president in history. In honor of the 39th president, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. is opening an exhibit featuring his personal Bible. The treasured artifact contains the president's handwritten notes, offering insights into Carter's faith journey. It will be displayed on the museum's first floor. Very cool. Happy birthday, Mr. President.
Absolutely, we celebrate with him. Thanks so much for joining us for this edition of Faith Nation.
Have a great night.